The Texas night stretched wide and empty, the two-lane highway cutting through the desert like an open wound. Nathaniel Graves, FBI Director for Houston, drove with steady control, his silver sedan slicing through the darkness. The air outside was still heavy with the day's scorching heat, the temperature hovering at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the sun having long since sunk beneath the horizon. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. 6 months of relentless work, unraveling a massive cartel operation, had finally come to an end. One weekend. That's all he had carved out for himself, a cold beer, a quiet night, the distant hum of crickets on his back porch. But peace is a fragile thing. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror turned his stomach to stone. He checked his speed, 55, the legal limit. His signals. Flawless. His paperwork. Untouchable. So why was he being pulled over? Nathaniel already knew the answer. As he eased onto the shoulder, dust curling in his headlights, the dark silhouette of a cop approached. The crunch of boots against gravel grew louder. He rolled down his window, his hands in clear view. He knew the rules. Evening, officer. What seems to be the issue? His voice was steady. Controlled. The officer didn't answer. He leaned in instead, the stench of chewing tobacco filling the car, and muttered 2 words that made Nathaniel's grip tighten on the wheel. License and registration, boy. This was no traffic stop. This was a warning. A game. A test of how much power one man could wield over another. What would you do in his position? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories. You won't believe what happens next. The Texas night stretched endlessly ahead, the two-lane highway cutting through the barren desert like a scar. Nathaniel Graves, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Houston branch, drove with steady precision, his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel of his silver sedan. The air outside still held the day's lingering heat, hovering around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, though the sun had long since dipped below the horizon. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, stars blinking to life in the vast expanse overhead. For the first time in months, Nathaniel felt a sliver of peace. After spending half a year dismantling a sprawling cartel operation, he had finally carved out a weekend for himself. He pictured it already, grilling on his back porch, a cold beer in hand, the distant hum of crickets filling the air. At 43 years old, after 2 decades of law enforcement, he had earned a moment of stillness. But peace was always fleeting. The flashing glow of red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror, the familiar pulse sending a tight knot of dread twisting in his stomach. He checked his speedometer, 55 on the nose, the exact legal limit. His turn signals had been precise, his paperwork was in order. There was no valid reason for this stop. And yet, he knew exactly why he was being pulled over. With a measured breath, he flicked on his right blinker and eased onto the gravel shoulder. The tires crunched against loose stone, kicking up a faint swirl of dust. His heart thudded, not with fear, but with frustration, a frustration born from years of knowing that a badge, a title, and decades of service meant nothing to the wrong kind of cop. The patrol car rolled up behind him, its high beams still blinding his mirrors. A silhouetted figure stepped out, the rhythmic crunch of boots against gravel closing in. Nathaniel kept his hands visible on the wheel. He knew the rules. He had lived by them since the first time he was pulled over at 16. the officer stopped just outside the driver's side window. He was lean and wiry, his uniform pressed stiff, his sunburned neck exposed beneath the collar. His badge read, Sergeant William Conroy. Nathaniel rolled down the window, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Evening, officer. What seems to be the issue? His voice was calm, measured. Conroy didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in, his breath thick with the stench of chewing tobacco, and muttered, License and registration, boy. Nathaniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't react. That word was a blade, one he had heard too many times before. It cut through the air like a warning, a signal that this stop was not about the law, but about power. I'd be happy to provide that, Nathaniel said smoothly, reaching toward the glove compartment. But first, I'd like to know why I've been pulled over. Conroy's sneer deepened. Instead of answering, he lifted his baton and slammed it onto the hood of the car, a sharp, metallic bang that echoed through the empty desert. The dent it left was deep and deliberate. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose. This wasn't about procedure. It never was. From behind, another door slammed. A second officer, Jacob Hollis, stocky and thick-necked, emerged from the patrol car. Back up. Nathaniel knew the type. Men who never left their small town, who let their jurisdiction stretch further than their moral compass. Men who thrived on the idea that the law bent to their will. What do we have here? Hollis drawled, stepping beside Conroy. His pale blue eyes flicked to Nathaniel's suit, then to his black skin. His smirk widened. He thinks he's got the right to ask questions, Conroy sneered. Must be one of those types. Nathaniel inhaled deeply, keeping his temper buried beneath a wall of discipline. My name is Nathaniel Graves. I'm the director of the FBI's Houston field office. My badge is in my inner jacket pocket. If you allow me to. His words barely left his mouth before Conroy yanked open the door. Out. Now. Nathaniel remained still. Officer, I am complying. My badge is in my pocket, and I will show it to you. Hollis grabbed his wrist, yanking him out of the car with unnecessary force. His shoulder slammed against the frame, the sting radiating through his ribs. Before he could fully plant his feet, Conroy wrenched his arms behind him. The cold snap of handcuffs locked tight around his wrists. Blood roared in Nathaniel's ears, but his face remained expressionless. He would not give them the reaction they wanted. You must think you're real special, don't you? Conroy muttered, digging his fingers into Nathaniel's shoulder, forcing him against the hood. Nathaniel kept his voice steady, despite the pain blooming across his temple where the baton had struck. This is a grave mistake. You don't know who you're messing with. Conroy leaned in, his lips curling into a cruel grin. Doesn't matter who you are. Out here, you're just another one of them. Hollis chuckled. And if you fight back, we'll make sure that badge don't mean a damn thing. Blood dripped from the cut above Nathaniel's brow, staining the polished silver of his sedan. But he wasn't out of options. Beneath the pain, beneath the suffocating weight of injustice pressing down on him, a plan had already taken shape. Inside his ear, nearly invisible beneath the curve of his jaw, a hidden earpiece buzzed to life. Nathaniel turned his head slightly, just enough to activate the secured line without detection. His voice was barely a whisper. Agent Langley, this is Graves. I need immediate backup. Highway 80, 30 miles west of El Paso. 2 hostile officers. Repeat, 2 hostile officers. For a moment, nothing. Then, a faint voice crackled back. Copy that, Director. ETA 10 minutes. Hold tight. Nathaniel inhaled deeply. 10 minutes was a long time to endure a beating. But not long at all compared to the years he had spent fighting for the justice these men mocked. And when those helicopter blades roared overhead, when these officers saw what true authority looked like, they would understand. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Texas night was silent, but in the digital world, a storm was brewing. Nathaniel Graves sat in his Houston home, exhaustion pressing heavy against his bones. The sting of his freshly bandaged temple from the traffic stop hours earlier still throbbed. He should have been able to breathe now. The FBI extraction team had pulled him out, and the corrupt officers William Conroy and Jacob Hollis had been forced to let him go. But something gnawed at him. This wasn't over. His gut told him men like Conroy and Hollis didn't back down easily. They were the kind of cops who saw accountability as a threat. The kind who would do anything to protect their power. And Nathaniel was right. It started as a quiet murmur on social media. A blurry, grainy dashcam video uploaded to a small local forum late that night. Within minutes, the views ticked upward in the thousands. The video was heavily edited, chopped, distorted, manipulated. The beginning had been removed, the moment when Conroy had slammed his baton onto the hood, when Hollis had yanked Nathaniel out of the car. Instead, the footage opened mid-conflict, the audio doctored to make it sound as though Nathaniel was the aggressor. A grainy clip showed him stepping out of his car, but the angle made it appear as though he lunged at Conroy. The video cut just before the baton strike, but not before a voice, fabricated, digitally altered, was added. "You think I won't take you out, pig?" Nathaniel's stomach twisted when he saw it. It wasn't his voice. He had said nothing like that. But the damage was done. 100,000 views within hours. By the next morning, it had spread beyond local forums, Twitter, Facebook, news blogs, even a right-wing talk show picked it up. The headlines were brutal. FBI director threatens police officers, thinks he's above the law. High-ranking black officer caught in dangerous altercation, was he resisting? Nathaniel Graves, hero or menace? The comments were worse. Typical. Give them a badge and they think they're gods. He should have been locked up, not let go. This guy's the FBI director. No wonder our country's going to hell. Nathaniel had spent 2 decades building a reputation for justice, for law, for doing things by the book. In less than 12 hours, it had been shredded to pieces. He turned off his phone, gripping the edge of his desk as a slow, simmering fury burned in his chest. Conroy wasn't just trying to cover his tracks. He was trying to erase Nathaniel altogether. And the worst part? It was working. Somewhere, in a darkened police station, Sergeant William Conroy leaned back in his chair, a smirk curling across his lips. The glow of the computer screen reflected in his pale blue eyes as he watched the video rack up thousands of new views. Across from him, Sheriff Randall Mercer, a burly, gray-haired man with a face carved from stone, crossed his arms. "You sure this'll hold?" Mercer asked. Conroy chuckled, taking a long sip of his coffee. "Doesn't have to hold," he said. "It just has to stick long enough for the right people to believe it." Mercer grunted. "And if the feds dig into it? Then we make sure they don't." The office door creaked open, and Deputy Voss stepped in. A younger man, mid-30s, with a buzz cut and a permanent sneer. "It's done," Voss said. "The next step's in motion." Conroy raised an eyebrow. "How long?" "Few hours, tops." Mercer exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. "You sure about this, Will? This is big. A video is one thing. This." Conroy set down his coffee and leaned forward. "Graves humiliated me," he said, his voice dark and low. "Made me look weak. That man should be rotting in a cell, not sitting in some cushy FBI office. We're gonna fix that." Mercer exchanged a glance with Voss, then sighed, rubbing his temple. "Fine. But if this goes south, it's on you." Conroy smiled. "Oh, it won't go south. By the time we're done, he won't just be a disgraced FBI agent. He'll be a fugitive." Nathaniel sat alone in his living room, staring at the glow of the television screen. The news anchors debated his fate, their voices filled with thinly veiled disgust. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered. "Nathaniel Graves." A pause. Then a female voice, tight with urgency. "Director Graves, you don't know me. My name is Marissa Kellerman. I work inside El Paso PD's tech division." Nathaniel straightened. "And?" Another pause. A deep breath. "They're setting you up," she whispered. "The video? It's just the start. There's more coming." Nathaniel's pulse thudded against his ribs. "More?" Marissa hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "They're about to make you the most wanted man in Texas." The line went dead. Nathaniel sat frozen. He had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a smear campaign anymore. It was an all-out manhunt. And he was the target. The silver sedan sliced through the Texas night, the glow of distant city lights barely visible on the horizon. Nathaniel Graves kept a firm grip on the wheel, his jaw set tight, his mind racing. The Dr. Dashcam video had done its job. His phone had been flooded with messages from colleagues, reporters, and even his own FBI higher-ups. Some believed him. Most didn't. Now, a corrupt police force was plotting something worse, and a stranger inside El Paso PD had just whispered a chilling warning over the phone. "They're about to make you the most wanted man in Texas." Nathaniel's hazel eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The road stretched behind him, empty, or so it seemed. A part of him had hoped the nightmare was over. That once he left El Paso behind, he could regroup. But deep down, he knew better. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Then, he saw it. Headlights. 3 sets. Coming fast. Nathaniel's stomach turned to stone. His instincts screamed at him. They weren't just passing vehicles. They were hunting him. The first truck pulled up alongside him, a jacked-up pickup, mud-caked tires, a Confederate flag whipping from the bed. The second flanked his right, boxing him in. The third lingered behind, cutting off any chance of escape. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, keeping his speed steady at 70 miles per hour. If he made one wrong move, it could be the last he ever made. Then, a brick flew through his windshield. The glass exploded inward, shards slicing across his face. He barely had time to shield his eyes before the brick slammed into the passenger seat, embedding itself into the upholstery. Nathaniel's vision blurred as warm blood trickled down his cheek. A voice roared from the truck beside him, loud enough to cut through the wind. "Get out, boy!" Nathaniel whipped the wheel left, trying to break free, but the truck beside him swerved with him, cutting him off. The vehicle behind him slammed into his rear bumper, jolting him forward. They were hurting him. Ahead, a rickety bridge loomed, a narrow, worn-down crossing over a dried-out riverbed, its wooden planks barely holding together. The lead truck accelerated, trying to force him over the edge. Nathaniel's mind worked in overdrive. If he let them force him off the bridge, he was dead. If he stopped, they'd drag him out and finish the job another way. He had one shot. He slammed the brakes. The pickup in front veered wildly, its tires screeching as the driver overcorrected. The truck behind him wasn't fast enough, it clipped his rear bumper, sending both vehicles skidding across the bridge. Nathaniel yanked the wheel right, barely keeping control as sparks shot from the metal guardrail. The third truck barreled past him, its driver momentarily caught off guard. Then, over the roar of engines, a chilling voice crackled through a CB radio from one of the trucks. "Finish him for me." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Sergeant William Conroy. This wasn't just some random attack. This was an execution. Nathaniel's muscles tensed as the truck to his right swerved in again, trying to force him off the road. He had no more room to run. So he didn't. He attacked. At the last second, he yanked the wheel left, slamming his car into the truck beside him. The impact sent the pickup fishtailing. The driver overcorrected, his tires catching the loose gravel. In an instant, the truck flipped, metal crunching as it rolled off the bridge and plummeted 30 feet into the dry riverbed below. The other two trucks hesitated for a split second. That was all Nathaniel needed. He floored the gas. The silver sedan surged forward, tearing down the highway at 100 miles per hour, the bridge shrinking in his rearview mirror. For the first time, he saw the hesitation in the other drivers. They had thought this would be easy, that they'd chase him down like a hunted animal. They hadn't expected him to fight back. The remaining two trucks stayed on his tail for another mile, but they weren't gaining ground anymore. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they disappeared. Nathaniel didn't slow down. This wasn't a victory. This was survival. 2 hours later, Nathaniel pulled into a deserted gas station off the highway. His windshield was shattered, blood still dried on his cheek, his shirt soaked in sweat. He stepped out, moving stiffly, every muscle aching from the night's events. Inside the gas station, the TV was playing. The headline made him stop cold. Breaking news. FBI Director Nathaniel Graves wanted for attack on police officers. Nathaniel's heart slammed against his ribs. A news anchor continued, her expression somber. New evidence has surfaced, linking Graves to multiple crimes, including resisting arrest and assault on law enforcement. The state of Texas has issued an emergency warrant for his arrest. Authorities warn that he is armed and dangerous. Nathaniel's breath came short. They did it. They flipped the script. They had taken his defense against a racist mob and turned it into a crime. He was no longer a target in the shadows. Now, he was the most wanted man in Texas. The gas station clerk, a middle-aged man with graying hair, glanced up at him. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Nathaniel turned away before the man could react, rushing back to his car. His life was unraveling faster than he could stop it. And somewhere, back in El Paso, William Conroy was smiling. Nathaniel Graves' hands shook as he gripped the burner phone, his pulse roaring in his ears. "Lena, listen to me, there's no time. Pack a bag, grab Jordan, and get out of the house. Right now." On the other end of the line, Lena Graves' voice was tight with confusion and fear. "Nathaniel, what are you talking about? What's—" The line cut dead. Nathaniel's stomach plummeted. He yanked the phone from his ear, staring at the black screen as a sinking dread crawled through his chest. They got to her. With shaking fingers, he tried redialing, but it was useless. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat, his breath coming hard and fast. Then, he saw the flashing breaking news banner on the gas station's television screen. FBI Director Nathaniel Graves, now a fugitive. Nathaniel froze, his blood running cold. The anchor's voice was steady, but dripping with controlled outrage. Houston authorities have issued an emergency warrant for the arrest of former FBI Director Nathaniel Graves, linking him to a major drug trafficking ring operating throughout Texas. In a shocking turn of events, Graves' own home was raided earlier this evening, where officers discovered over a pound of uncut cocaine hidden within the residence. His wife, Lena Graves, and their 12-year-old son, Jordan Graves, have been taken into custody for questioning. Nathaniel's knees nearly buckled. His family. They planted drugs. He barely heard the rest of the news report as his mind spiraled. They had just turned his family into criminals. This was Conroy's next move. And Nathaniel had walked straight into the trap. Lena Graves had barely set down the phone when the first explosion rocked the front door. Bam! 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 Houston PD, open up. Search warrant. Before she could react, the door flew inward, splintering against the wall. A dozen SWAT officers in full riot gear stormed inside, rifles raised. Lena screamed, instinctively reaching for Jordan, who had been sitting on the living room floor, eyes wide with fear. Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them. The men moved fast, rough hands yanking her down. Jordan screamed as an officer grabbed him, his small frame struggling against the grip. "Mom. He's just a child," Lena cried, trying to push forward. A gloved hand shoved her back down, slamming her to the hardwood floor. From the hallway, a burly officer in a tactical vest stepped forward, arms crossed. His badge read, Sergeant Edwin Voss. He was grinning. "Damn shame, Mrs. Graves. Looks like your husband forgot to tell you he was a drug dealer." Lena's eyes flared with fury. You're lying. Nathaniel has nothing to do with. Voss held up a plastic bag. The white powder inside was unmistakable. Cocaine. He tossed it onto the coffee table, shaking his head. Found this in the back of your closet. Lena gasped. That's not ours. You planted that. Voss just chuckled, nodding toward his men. Bag them both. Lena's wrists were yanked behind her, the zip ties biting into her skin as she locked eyes with Jordan. Tears streamed down his terrified face. Mom, what's happening? Lena's heart shattered. Nathaniel drove recklessly down the interstate, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind was on fire, his thoughts racing through every possible move. He needed to get to Houston. Now. But then, another alert pinged on his phone's cracked screen. A video had just surfaced online. With a trembling hand, Nathaniel opened it. The grainy footage showed Lena and Jordan being led out of their home in handcuffs. Lena's face was pale, her eyes hollow with shock. Jordan looked lost, terrified, barely understanding what was happening. A news anchor's voice played over the clip. Authorities believe Lena Graves played a key role in laundering money for her husband's criminal operations. Given the amount of cocaine recovered in the home, her charges could be upgraded to felony distribution. Nathaniel gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles went white. They were going to make sure his family never walked free again. Sergeant William Conroy leaned against his desk, watching the footage play out on a laptop. He took a slow sip of coffee, his satisfaction evident. Damn good work, Voss, he muttered, tipping his cup in appreciation. Voss smirked through the video call. Appreciate it, boss. You should have seen her face when I showed her the drugs. Conroy chuckled. Bet she screamed. Voss grinned. Like a goddamn banshee. Conroy leaned forward, setting his cup down with a soft clink. This is it, he said, his voice calm but dripping with satisfaction. This is how we bury Graves for good. Nobody comes back from something like this. Voss nodded. We'll make sure they never do. Conroy closed the laptop. As far as he was concerned, Nathaniel Graves was already a dead man. Nathaniel pulled off the road, tires screeching as he skidded onto a dirt shoulder. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel, breathing hard. They had stolen everything from him. His career. His reputation. His family. But if Conroy and his people thought he was done, they were dead wrong. Nathaniel lifted his head, eyes burning with fury. He had one mission now. Get Lena and Jordan back. And to do that, he was going to bring hell down on everyone who had done this to them. Nathaniel Graves had spent his entire career dismantling criminal empires, but he had never expected to become the target of one. Now, after days of running, fighting, and watching his world collapse, he had finally found the man pulling the strings. Mayor Clayton Warren. El Paso's most powerful figure. Warren had spent a decade shaping the city's corruption, his hands in everything from cartel drug routes to bribed law enforcement. Conroy, Voss, and the entire network of crooked cops. They were just foot soldiers. Nathaniel had thought William Conroy was the endgame, but the truth was far worse. Conroy was nothing but a pawn. Warren was the king. And tonight, Nathaniel was going to take him off the board. The Warren estate loomed atop a desert ridge, a massive stucco fortress surrounded by a wrought iron gate and high-tech security. Nathaniel hadn't come unprepared. He ditched his stolen vehicle miles back, trekking through the desert under the cover of darkness. His FBI training had taught him one thing: every fortress has a weakness. A gardener's entrance along the eastern wall was his way in. He scaled the fence, landing in a manicured courtyard filled with desert succulents. Keeping low, he moved toward the main house, avoiding the roving security cameras. Through a tall glass window, he spotted his target. Warren sat inside his study, a crystal glass of whiskey in his hand, his silver hair slicked back as he spoke into a secure phone line. Nathaniel slipped inside, hiding in the shadows, activating the tiny recording device clipped inside his jacket. He needed a confession. And Warren was about to give him one. Warren exhaled, swirling his drink before speaking into the phone. "Everything's under control," he said. "Graves is finished. His wife and kid. They'll stay locked up long enough to ruin his name. If the feds dig too deep, we've got Judge Whitaker in our pocket. They'll hit a wall." Nathaniel's fingers curled into fists. Warren continued, his voice smooth and calculated. "Conroy did his part, but let's be real, he's just a useful idiot. The real money comes from keeping the system exactly how it is. The cartels keep paying, the cops keep taking, and I keep winning. That's how it's always worked." Nathaniel inhaled sharply, his pulse steady. This was it. This was the evidence he needed to take Warren down. He started to move, but his luck ran out. A voice boomed from behind. "Drop it, Fed." Nathaniel froze. The study doors exploded open, and a dozen armed men in tactical gear stormed in, faces hidden beneath black masks, rifles raised. A private militia. Warren's personal enforcers. Nathaniel whipped around, hands raised, calculating his options. Warren simply smiled. He ended his call, setting his drink down, rising with a slow, practiced ease. "You really thought you could walk in here and bring me down?" Warren chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a dead man, Graves." Nathaniel's mind raced. He had one advantage left. The recording device was still running. If he could survive the next 5 minutes, this could still work. But survival wouldn't come easy. One of the militia members slammed the stock of his rifle into Nathaniel's ribs, sending him crashing onto the hardwood floor. Pain shot through his body, but he used the momentum, rolling just as another goon aimed his weapon. Nathaniel lunged, grabbing the man's rifle and twisting hard. The gun went off, the bullet tearing into the ceiling instead of his skull. Chaos erupted. Gunfire ripped through the study as Nathaniel scrambled behind a leather chair, grabbing a fallen pistol from the ground. He fired 3 shots. One gunman went down, his body slamming against the bookshelf. Another staggered, blood pooling beneath him. But he was still outnumbered. More men poured into the room, their bullets shredding furniture, splintering wood and glass. Nathaniel knew he wouldn't last long in here. He needed an exit. Then, his salvation arrived. The windows exploded inward as flashbang grenades detonated, sending a shockwave of light and sound through the room. Nathaniel shielded his eyes, his ears ringing as figures dropped in from above. FBI tactical agents. His backup had arrived. Warren's men panicked, turning their rifles toward the newcomers, but it was too late. Gunfire erupted, and the militia fell in seconds. Warren tried to run, bolting for a hidden door, but Nathaniel caught him, slamming him against his desk. "You're done, Clayton." Warren sneered, but Nathaniel simply reached into his jacket, pulling out the tiny recording device. He pressed play. Warren's own voice filled the room. "Conroy did his part, but let's be real, he's just a useful idiot. The real money comes from keeping the system exactly how it is. The cartels keep paying, the cops keep taking, and I keep winning." Warren's face drained of color. Behind them, FBI agents surged forward, locking cuffs around his wrists. Nathaniel stepped back, bloodied, bruised, but victorious. It was over. Mayor Clayton Warren, the mastermind behind everything, was finally going to prison. Outside, the night air was crisp, the faint glow of El Paso's skyline stretching below. Nathaniel watched as Warren was shoved into a black SUV, his empire crumbling in real time. For the first time in days, he felt something close to relief. But then, his phone rang. It was his deputy director, Sarah Langley. Nathaniel answered, expecting congratulations. Instead, her voice was grim. "Nathaniel, listen to me carefully. The raid wasn't just on Warren's house. The FBI raided Houston PD an hour ago. We arrested Conroy, Voss, and their men. But, ***. A pause. Lena and Jordan are still missing." Nathaniel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, missing?" Langley's voice was ice cold. "The police station logs say they were transferred. But Nathaniel, there's no record of where they went." Nathaniel went rigid, his knuckles turning white around the phone. The war against Warren was over. But the fight for his family had just begun. Nathaniel Graves had won the battle, but the war was far from over. He stood in the aftermath of the raid on Mayor Clayton Warren's mansion, blood staining his torn white shirt, his ribs still aching from the fight that had nearly killed him. Warren, the mastermind behind the corruption, the cartels, the false charges against him, was now in FBI custody, his empire burning down around him. But none of it mattered. Not when his wife and son were still missing. Nathaniel paced in front of the black FBI-issued SUV, the cool night air unable to calm the fire raging inside him. Deputy Director Sarah Langley's voice still echoed in his head from their last phone call. "The police station logs say they were transferred. But Nathaniel, there's no record of where they went." Transferred. That was the word corrupt cops used when they wanted people to disappear. Nathaniel clenched his fists. He had spent his entire career hunting criminals, and now, the very system he swore to protect had taken the only two people that mattered to him. He wasn't done fighting. Not yet. With Warren locked away, Nathaniel had only one option left: dig into the police records himself. He and Langley drove back toward the El Paso FBI field office, the SUV's headlights cutting through the quiet streets. Nathaniel's face was grim, his mind running through possibilities. Who would have the power to move prisoners off the books? Who would be willing to risk everything for one last move? The answer was obvious. Sheriff Randall Mercer. The man who had protected Conroy and his dirty cops. The man who had let Warren run his criminal empire unchecked. And now, the last man standing in the way of Nathaniel getting his family back. By the time they reached the FBI field office, Nathaniel had a plan. Langley led him to a back room filled with secure servers and database terminals. He logged in, his fingers flying over the keyboard, pulling up every transport record from the past 48 hours. Most were standard: prisoner transfers, warrant executions, patrol logs. Then he found it. An unscheduled transport order. No case number. No officer in charge. Just two names. Lena Graves. Jordan Graves. Destination: unknown. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. This was it. They were being moved off the grid. Langley hovered over his shoulder, her face dark with concern. This isn't normal, Nathaniel. They were taken outside the system. He exhaled sharply. Then we go outside the system to get them back. Nathaniel and a small team of FBI agents rolled up to the El Paso County Sheriff's Department just after midnight. The building was mostly dark, but a few officers lingered inside, their eyes shifting nervously as Nathaniel stepped through the doors. Sheriff Randall Mercer was waiting in his office, a cigar smoldering in his hand, his eyes cool and calculating. Well. Look what the storm dragged in, Mercer said, leaning back in his chair. Nathaniel didn't waste time. He slapped the transport document onto Mercer's desk. Where are they? Mercer glanced at the paper, unimpressed. Funny thing about paperwork, Director. Some of it gets lost. Some of it never existed in the first place. Nathaniel's patience snapped. He lunged across the desk, grabbing Mercer by the collar, slamming him against the wall. The cigar tumbled from his lips as Mercer choked, his face turning red. Where the hell are my wife and son? Nathaniel growled. Mercer wheezed out a crooked smile. You think Warren was the top of the food chain, he rasped. There are bigger men than him. Men who don't take kindly to their operations getting interrupted. Your family. They're just leverage now. Nathaniel's pulse pounded. Leverage. That meant they were still alive. Before he could react, the door burst open. Two deputies stormed in, weapons raised. Nathaniel released Mercer, raising his hands, but Langley and the FBI agents were already drawing their weapons. Federal jurisdiction, Langley snapped. You so much as breathe wrong, and we'll have you in cuffs before sunrise. Mercer straightened his wrinkled shirt, his smugness returning. Doesn't matter what you do, he said, shaking his head. You can't protect everyone, Graves. Not forever. Nathaniel gritted his teeth. That's where you're wrong. Because I only need one night. 30 minutes later, Nathaniel was back on the road. The information extracted from Mercer had led them to an abandoned industrial site on the outskirts of town. Nathaniel's stomach twisted as he pulled up. A warehouse loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its walls covered in peeling paint. This was where they were keeping his family. Langley and her team moved in silently, their weapons drawn. Nathaniel's heartbeat thundered as he approached the rusted metal door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil, the dim overhead lights flickering. Then, a sound. A muffled whimper. Nathaniel spotted them immediately. Lena and Jordan, bound and gagged in the corner, their eyes wide with fear. The two men guarding them barely had time to react before Langley and her agents swept through the room. Gunshots rang out. One of the men went down instantly. The other tried to run, but Nathaniel was faster. He tackled him to the ground, slamming his fist into the man's jaw so hard he went limp. Then, silence. Nathaniel rushed to his family, ripping the ropes from Lena's wrists. Her arms immediately wrapped around him, her body trembling. "You found us," she whispered. Jordan clutched his father's jacket, burying his face against him. Nathaniel held them both tightly, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. After everything, the manhunt, the betrayal, the false charges, the near-death fights, he had gotten them back. Nothing else mattered. Hours later, Nathaniel stood outside the FBI field office, watching as the final corrupt officers were processed. Warren was in maximum security. Conroy and Voss were awaiting trial. Mercer was in custody. It was over. But at what cost? Nathaniel turned, watching as Lena and Jordan sat in a waiting SUV. Lena's eyes met his. There was love there, but also something else. A sadness he couldn't erase. He had saved them. But some wounds don't heal overnight. Nathaniel knew this war had changed him. And now, he had to find a way back to the man he was before. The silence before the first shot was brief, a heartbeat of stillness before all hell broke loose. Nathaniel Graves barely had time to roll behind a thick wooden desk before the first burst of automatic gunfire shredded through the air, splintering furniture, tearing through bookshelves and antique paintings. The mayor's private militia, Warren's last line of defense, had stormed the study, their faces obscured by black tactical masks, their rifles trained on him. Nathaniel's mind raced. No way out. No easy escape. Just survival. He reached for the pistol at his hip, exhaling sharply before returning fire. The first gunman rounded the corner, but Nathaniel was faster. He fired twice, one shot hitting center mass, sending the man crumpling against a bookshelf. The others fanned out, moving tactically, rifles barking as bullets ripped through the room. Nathaniel ducked behind a leather couch, using it for cover as splinters and glass rained down around him. He needed more firepower. His eyes darted toward the nearest fallen gunman. An M4 rifle lay just inches from the man's lifeless fingers. No choice. Nathaniel lunged, grabbing the rifle just as another burst of gunfire chewed through the floorboards beside him. He rolled, bringing the rifle up, squeezed the trigger, and dropped two more attackers before they could react. 3 down. 5 to go. But the rest weren't panicking. They were pressing forward. Nathaniel's heart pounded, his breath controlled as he assessed the room. They weren't trying to kill him. Not yet. They wanted him alive. Which meant they were trying to box him in, to force him into a position where they could take him. Not happening. Nathaniel took 2 quick steps sideways, firing again. A fourth man fell, clutching his chest as he collapsed. Then, In the midst of the chaos, he saw Warren. The mayor had slipped toward a side door, ducking away as his men provided cover. Nathaniel cursed. Warren was running. Not today. Nathaniel broke from cover, sprinting toward the exit just as Warren burst into the mansion's driveway. The corrupt mayor scrambled into his black SUV, yanking the door shut. Nathaniel raised the rifle, took aim at the tires, and bang! Bang! The front tires exploded, rubber shredding as the vehicle lurched forward, grinding to a stop. Warren froze, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his face pale with shock. Nathaniel stalked forward, rifle raised. Game over, Warren. The mayor raised both hands, his chest heaving. Nathaniel ripped the door open, yanking him out onto the pavement. Warren hit the ground hard, gasping, trembling, not from pain, but from the realization that his empire was crumbling around him. The sound of rotors filled the air, followed by the distant howl of sirens. Nathaniel looked up to see FBI helicopters sweeping in, their spotlights locking onto the mansion's courtyard. Within seconds, black SUVs and armored vehicles tore into the driveway, agents spilling out with weapons drawn. Federal agents. Drop your weapons. The remaining gunmen hesitated, then threw down their rifles. The fight was over. Two agents rushed forward, slapping handcuffs around Clayton Warren's wrists as the corrupt mayor was hauled to his feet, his tailored suit now dirt-streaked and torn. The cameras were already rolling, local news crews broadcasting the arrest live. The city of El Paso was watching. The man who had run it from the shadows for years was now being dragged away in handcuffs. The fallout was immediate. By morning, Warren's connections unraveled, his cartel ties, bribed officials, and rigged law enforcement operations all exposed to the public. Sheriff Randall Mercer was arrested, along with William Conroy and Edwin Voss. Their empire of corruption and fear crumbled in less than 24 hours. For the first time in a long time, Nathaniel should have felt victorious. But he wasn't ready for what came next. Nathaniel sat in an FBI field office, his ribs aching, his body exhausted. He had just brought down one of the most corrupt politicians in Texas. But none of it mattered as he looked up to see Lena standing in front of him. His wife. The woman he had fought so hard to protect. But there was no relief in her eyes. Only something worse. A quiet, distant sadness. She held a sealed envelope in her hands, her grip tight, her knuckles white. Nathaniel's stomach twisted. He knew what it was before she even spoke. Divorce papers. Lena took a shaky breath. You saved the city, Nathaniel. Her voice was soft, almost numb. But you lost us. Nathaniel felt the weight of those words crush him. He wanted to speak, to explain, to tell her that everything he had done was for them. But in the end, it didn't matter. The fight had changed him. And it had cost him everything. She placed the envelope on the desk, her eyes brimming with emotion, then turned and walked away. Nathaniel watched her go, his hands clenched into fists, his heart hammering. Jordan, his son, stood a few feet away, watching his mother leave with uncertainty in his young eyes. He hesitated, then followed her. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. He had won. But at what cost? Nathaniel Graves was no longer a hunted man. His name would be cleared, his legacy restored, and the people who had tried to bury him would rot in prison for the rest of their lives. But the one thing he fought hardest for, his family, was gone. He had spent so much time chasing justice, he hadn't realized he was also running away from the people who needed him most. Now, standing alone in an empty room, staring at a signed document that severed the only thing that mattered, Nathaniel finally understood. Justice had a price. And this time, he had paid it in full. Nathaniel Graves had spent the last 72 hours fighting for his life. He had taken down Mayor Clayton Warren, dismantled a corrupt law enforcement network, and cleared his name after being falsely labeled a fugitive. He had done what many before him had failed to do. He had exposed the systemic rot running through El Paso's leadership, from the police department to the mayor's office. And now, standing outside the FBI field office, he finally saw them. Lena and Jordan. The people he had fought so hard to protect. His wife and son. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something close to relief. But then he saw Lena's expression. There was no warmth. No gratitude. No sign of the joy he had imagined. Just a deep, quiet sadness. And that's when he knew. Something had broken between them. Something that no victory could repair. Lena walked toward him, her movements measured and deliberate, her gaze steady. She didn't run to him. She didn't embrace him. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. She handed it to him without a word. Nathaniel stared at it for a long moment before slowly peeling it open. His hands, which had held guns, cuffs, and the weight of an entire city's corruption, shook as he pulled out the document inside. Divorce papers. His heart plummeted. He had been prepared for a fight. He had been prepared to take down another wave of corrupt officials, if necessary. But he hadn't been prepared for this. He looked up at her, struggling to form words. Lena. She held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice was calm, but final. You saved the world, Nathaniel. But you lost us. The words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Jordan stood beside her, his 12-year-old frame stiff, his eyes uncertain. Nathaniel expected him to say something. To ask to stay. To tell him he understood. But his son just looked down at the pavement, then followed his mother as she turned away. Nathaniel felt his breath catch in his throat. Wait. His voice cracked. Lena, please. She didn't turn around. Neither did Jordan. And then, they were gone. Nathaniel stood there, the envelope crumpling in his grip, the weight of his victory pressing down on him like a crushing force. He had thought, foolishly, desperately, that once this was over, he could go back to his life. That the war would end, and he would walk back into his home, into his family, into the life he had before. But that life no longer existed. He had destroyed the men who had tried to ruin him. He had dismantled an empire of corruption. He had won. And in doing so, he had lost everything. As the sun dipped below the El Paso skyline, Nathaniel sat on the steps outside the FBI field office, staring at the city he had just changed forever. A news report played on a nearby screen, the anchor's voice bright with urgency. Mayor Clayton Warren, now in federal custody, faces multiple charges, including conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. The FBI has confirmed that widespread corruption within the El Paso Police Department has been exposed, leading to the arrest of multiple high-ranking officers. The screen cut to footage of Warren being shoved into the back of a black SUV, his once proud face pale and shaken. Nathaniel watched, expression unreadable. He had done this. He had fought for justice. And he had won. But for all the justice in the world, it couldn't bring back what he had lost. Langley walked out of the building, stopping beside him. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, watching him. Finally, she sighed. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" Nathaniel didn't answer. Because a part of him had known. From the moment he had chosen to fight instead of run, he had known. But knowing something and accepting it were two very different things. Langley sat down beside him, crossing her arms. "You did the right thing, Nathaniel." He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "Did I?" She looked at him. Yes. He wasn't sure he believed her. Nathaniel had spent his whole life believing that justice meant something. But what was justice without the people you loved? What was the point of winning a war if you had no one left to come home to? Langley must have seen it in his face because she sighed. "Go home, Nathaniel." Nathaniel let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Where's that, exactly?" She didn't have an answer. Neither did he. Nathaniel eventually stood, slipping the divorce papers into his jacket pocket. He didn't rip them up. He didn't throw them away. They were just another scar now. He took one last look at the city he had fought to save, then turned toward the parking lot. There was nowhere to go. No home to return to. But he'd figure it out. He always did. As he walked toward his car, the night swallowed him whole. Justice had been served. The war had been won. But Nathaniel Graves was a man without a home. Justice isn't a gift, it's a fight. Nathaniel Graves had spent his entire life fighting for it. He had fought corrupt cops who believed their badge made them invincible. He had fought a system designed to silence men like him. He had fought for the truth when the world tried to bury it under lies. And in the end, he won. Mayor Clayton Warren was in federal custody, his empire of cartels, bribes, and corruption crumbling around him. Conroy, Voss, and the rest of El Paso's dirty cops were in prison cells, facing the very system they had once abused. The city had witnessed the truth unfold on live television, and for the first time in years, the people who had abused power with impunity were being held accountable. But justice always comes at a price. Nathaniel had fought and won, but it had cost him everything. Racism isn't just slurs or batons, it's a system. A system that had tried to erase him. First, by framing him as a criminal. Then, by turning the public against him with fabricated evidence. And when that didn't work, they went after his family. Nathaniel had stood his ground. He had shattered the illusion that the system was untouchable. But the people he loved were collateral damage. When Lena handed him those divorce papers, she didn't do it because she stopped loving him. She did it because loving him had become a war zone. Because every fight he won came with another battle waiting in the shadows. Because Jordan deserved a childhood free from fear. Nathaniel understood that. It didn't make it hurt any less. He had saved a city, but lost his home. He had won the war, but lost the people he fought hardest for. That was the price. Nathaniel had spent years believing that justice was about the law. But now he knew better. Justice wasn't written in legal codes. It wasn't handed down by courts. It wasn't a gift given freely. It had to be fought for. One voice could make a difference. One voice could crack a system built on silence. One voice could force the world to see what it tried to ignore. But that voice always came at a cost. And Nathaniel Graves had paid it in full. Justice is never freely given, it must be fought for. Nathaniel Graves stood against corruption, refusing to be silenced, and in doing so, he proved that one voice can shake an entire system. But justice is not without cost. It's not just about exposing the truth, it's about surviving the consequences. The battle isn't fought in a single moment, it's a relentless war that demands sacrifice. Nathaniel won his fight. He dismantled a network of corrupt officials, shattered the illusion of untouchable power, and set a precedent that no man, no matter how high, is above the law. But in the process, he lost the people he loved most. His wife and son didn't leave because they stopped loving him. They left because the battle for justice had consumed him, turning their lives into collateral damage. This is the reality many face. The struggle for what is right often comes at a price. The question is, how much are we willing to pay? Let's hear your thoughts. Where are you watching from? Comment below, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss the next story. Your voice matters. Let's keep this conversation alive.